Welcome to Resilience with Tasha Schuh. I am so grateful that you're here because today we're continuing my story and we're stepping into one of the most pivotal moments of my life. And so this episode is called ICU, Life on the Edge. And this is part 1, the prognosis. So if you listened to the last episode, you know that I was airlifted after my accident. And today I'm taking you inside what happened when I arrived at the hospital, what the doctors discovered, what my family was told, and the moment I began to understand that my life would never look the same. So this episode is heavy, it's honest, and it's the emotional anchor of my story. Before we begin, I just want to gently say this. If you're walking through something that feels overwhelming right now, I hope this episode reminds you that even in the darkest moments, you are not alone. So let's go through this together. When the helicopter landed in Rochester, Minnesota, I was brought directly to St. Mary's Hospital, the hospital for Mayo Clinic, and they rushed me to 8 Mary Bry, which is the neurological intensive care unit. And that's where my world became very small and, oh my goodness, very, very uncertain. While I was in that helicopter fighting to breathe, as I had just vomited up my dinner, my mom was doing something no parent ever wants to do. She was making phone calls. I am the youngest of 3 kids, and my brother lived in Menominee at the time. He was going to school at college at Stout. And that night it was snowing. Roads were slick. Visibility was low. And my mom called him and begged him not to come. Please don't drive down tonight. I cannot worry about another child getting hurt. We don't even know what's happening yet. So she told him to wait until the next morning. But then she called my sister. My sister Angie lived in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She lived with her husband Scott, and they had just gotten married the year before. And I had actually sung in their wedding. But when my mom told Angie what had happened and told her not to come yet, my sister did not listen. She did the exact opposite. She grabbed 2 shoes. They weren't even matching. One brown, one black. Threw them into a laundry basket with random clothes and snacks and got in the car. And they drove for 5 hours. In the winter, in the snow. She wasn't waiting. She was coming. And little did we know how important her role would become. When I arrived in the ICU, it felt like stepping into another universe. Doctors leaned over me with a small metal instrument, poking my arms, my legs, and my torso, asking, "Can you feel this? How about this? What about here?" Over and over. It felt like they asked me 100 times. And at some point, I became confused. I wasn't sure what I could feel and what I couldn't. And I was so unbelievably tired. My eyelids felt like they weighed 20 pounds each. I just wanted to sleep. But they kept saying, "Tasha, stay awake. You have to stay awake. We need to know what you can feel." And there is something terrifying about wanting to sleep and being told you can't. Your body is begging for rest. I was in complete trauma. My brain felt foggy, but the doctors needed answers. They needed to know what works and what doesn't. And every time they asked, "Can you feel this?" there was a silent panic rising inside of me. What if I can't? What if this is permanent? What if this is already decided? At 16, I didn't have the maturity or the language to process those thoughts, but they were there, floating under the surface. Now, shortly after the scans, the x-rays, all the tests, the doctors walked out to my family, and they told them my prognosis, bluntly and not softened at all. They said Tasha will be a C5 quadriplegic. She will be paralyzed from the chest down. She will use a wheelchair for the rest of her life, and she will never walk again. When my mom heard those devastating words, the first words that came out of her mouth was, "Who's going to tell Tasha that?" They responded, "She already knows." But here's what's strange. I don't remember clearly being told. I mean, somehow I knew it's hazy, it's foggy. I was likely on a lot of medication. But even in that blur, I sensed the shift. Something irreversible had happened. But what teenager accepts the words, "You will never walk again"? No matter how I was told, I wasn't accepting it. I was determined that I would prove them wrong. I was going to beat the odds. Tasha Schuh was invincible. But there was one major problem with me thinking that. My C5 vertebrae had broken off into what would look like an Indian arrowhead and went directly into my spinal cord. The doctors told my family that did not completely sever my spinal cord, but the damage was so severe, it was as if it had. The swelling, the trauma, the interruption between my brain and my body, and because of all of that happening, they could not operate immediately. The bone fragments had to settle before they could safely do the surgery. So the doctors decided to place me into a traction bed. They screwed a halo into my head, literally secured into my skull. I actually still have the scars today that show where that halo was screwed in. And at the top of the bed, they attached 100-pound weights to apply constant upward tension, stretching my neck so the bones could slowly settle into place. And the bed, it rotated constantly, back and forth, back and forth, all day, all night. It never stopped. The rotation wasn't violent, it was slow, mechanical, predictable, and yet it made everything feel unstable. You couldn't brace yourself. You couldn't adjust. You couldn't move your arms to scratch your face. You just moved with it. And when the bed rotated me away from my friends and family, that's when they cried. When it rotated me back, they were sure to be composed with a smile on their face. They were absorbing the fear so I wouldn't have to. Now, because of all of this, I clearly did not understand the severity of my injuries. I was telling my friends that I couldn't wait to party with them the next weekend. I couldn't wait to get back to school. I even asked if they could please cover my clay pottery in my art class with a wet cloth so it wouldn't dry out. Clearly, I had no idea what was going on, the severity of my injuries. And I also told them that they needed to tell my teachers that I wouldn't be in school for a while. When they heard this, they gently giggled. They told me that I didn't need to worry about that because apparently I had been on the news the night before. The teachers already knew. What I didn't realize was that Serena and I were both on the news. 2 classmates, same school, 2 catastrophic accidents, 3 days apart, and our town was shaken. But I was worried about pottery? That's what denial looks like. But even in the middle of my own trauma, I was constantly thinking about Serena. Does anyone have updates? How is she doing? Has anyone heard anything? My classmates and family shared that she had a traumatic brain injury, and doctors weren't sure about the long-term severity. And I don't remember all the details, but what I do remember is the heaviness, the fear, the ache when I thought about her. Your world can be collapsing, but your heart can still reach outward. And during this time, there was pain. Deep, structural, overwhelming pain. My neck throbbed. My head ached from the halo. My head also ached from where it had landed and smashed into that cement floor. And during this time, they also inserted a feeding tube through my nose and down into my stomach. Ouch, it hurt so bad. But there's something incredibly humbling about losing control of basic functions. Eating, moving, turning your head. At 16, you feel independent. And suddenly, I couldn't even lift my own arm. That loss of independence was suffocating. The ICU has no rules. There is no real sense of day or night. The lights are always on. Machines hum constantly. Monitors beep in steady rhythms. You don't even sleep deeply. You drift. And every time you begin to drift, someone wakes you up. Vitals, blood pressure, blood work, neurological checks. Open your eyes. Can you feel this? And time stretches in the ICU. Minutes feel like hours. Hours blur together. And I remember staring at the ceiling tiles, tracing tiny cracks with my eyes, just to anchor myself to something that felt stable. Because my body didn't feel stable. My future didn't feel stable. And I had no control over any of it. But thankfully, visitors kept coming. Friends, relatives, community members. And as much as I appreciated them as it made the time go by faster, I was exhausted. Trauma takes energy, and my body was fighting something enormous. And during these 3 days before I had my surgery, I remember telling my boyfriend that he should break up with me. I didn't want to ruin his senior year. He was a year older than me, and he loved to party. And I didn't want to wreck this time of his life. But he refused. He told me that he loved me, that he wasn't going anywhere. He wanted to marry me. And at 16, that felt like hope. But I could see fear in my parents' eyes, the kind they tried to hide. They were sleeping in chairs, in cots in the waiting room, listening to surgeons, learning words they never wanted to learn, trying to be strong for me. One day, I was in the room by myself as my sister went to the bathroom. A doctor was in my room, and I said something hopeful about wanting to walk again or walking. And he looked at me and he said, "What are you talking about? You have a spinal cord injury. You are never going to walk again." No softness, no cushion, just truth. And for the first time, I began to understand. When my sister came back into the room, I was sobbing because I realized Tasha Schuh was not invincible. And as reality settled in, thoughts crossed my mind I had never thought before. If this is my life, I don't want it. I don't want to live in a wheelchair. I am not strong enough to live in a wheelchair. I can't do this. I didn't want to die because I was weak. I wanted to die because I couldn't imagine surviving this. And little did I know, just 3 days later, during that 16-hour neck surgery, I would come terrifyingly close to getting my wish. Thank you again for joining me for episode 3, ICU Life on the Edge, part 1, the Prognosis. Please subscribe and stay tuned for part 2, where I'll share what happened during surgery and how close I truly came to dying. Now, if this episode resonated with you and you're walking through something overwhelming right now, you don't have to do it alone. You can learn more about my resilience coaching and the path tools I teach at tashaschuh.com/coaching. And I will put that link directly in the show notes so you can easily click and learn more. And if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe so you do not miss next week's episode. Thank you so much for being here. This is Resilience with Tasha Schuh, and we are just getting started.